Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're going to let this room fill up before we get started. Roberta, thank you so much for joining us. Hello, David. Hello, Wendy Crockett, 2019 Iron Butt Rally winner. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Pat and Sylvia. Good to see you back. John Del Vecchio, thank you so much for joining yet another one of our Rev Talks during Rev Conference. Suzanne, Warren, very nice to see you. I'm so glad that you guys are here. I cannot wait for you to see this presentation. I have been lucky enough to see it a couple of times myself, but every time I see it, I learn something new and he has more information to share. So that is true this time around as well. We're going to let the room fill up just a little bit more. I still have our attendees list growing, so we're going to make sure that we don't leave anyone out. Oh, look at that. We have Gear Chick in the room. The leading authority in the United States on women's motorcycle gear is here to watch this presentation. Isn't that exciting? Ellen, it's so nice to see you. You and I are such safety-minded individuals, and it's really great to see you in a couple of these other presentations today, and I'm so glad to see you in this one. I think you're going to absolutely love the information that Chris has to share with us. It looks like we are slowing down on that attendee list growing, so I am going to, without further ado, introduce to you Dr. Chris Huron. He is a senior research fellow at Deakin University. Chris is a textile research scientist using his skills to improve motorcycle protective clothing. And with that, I'm going to leave the floor to Dr. Chris Huron. Thank you so much for being with us. Take it away.
Hello all. It's good to see you from this side of the world. For those that are anywhere savvy, it's about 12 hours difference, 14 hours difference, so it's quite early here in Australia. I'm going to talk to you today about a program that I've been working on now for quite a number of years. I'm going to talk to you about the MotoCAP program. So what I'm aiming to do is to talk to you about MotoCAP, introduce MotoCAP, let you know how to use MotoCAP, why we're doing MotoCAP, and then I'll give you a little bit of the science so that you can understand how we've used science to help us to set up the MotoCAP program. So for those of you that don't know about MotoCAP, MotoCAP is a motorcycle clothing assessment system that was set up by the Australian and New Zealand government. And what it is a way of riders being able to get information about the gear that they're going to purchase. And the idea is if we empower riders so that they know the information they need to make the right decision, then there is a much larger chance of them going out and making that decision. If we say to riders, you will wear this, people won't wear it. So the whole idea of MotoCAP is to give us the information so that we know what we're buying when we go into a store. Now, it's really easy to get onto the website. It's motocap.com.au. There's also an EDZ website, but I'll just give the one to make it nice and simple. The biggest problem is it's mostly Australian and New Zealand gear, although there is quite a wide range of European gear in there as well. So the reason we did MotoCAP, a lot of people hear about that person that's killed on their motorcycle. In Australia, now these are statistics for Australia, for every motorcyclist that is injured on the road, killed on the road, there's 15 which are fatally injured, and they're represented by the little red squares around the riders along the top line there. And then there's a further 45 that are injured as on the road to a lesser level. Now, with protective gear, we're generally not going to have an effect on that person that's killed, but we may have effect on the people in the red, and we'll definitely, if we've got the right gear on, have an effect on those people, the 45 people at the bottom of the screen. So this is one of the reasons why we think that MotoCAP is an important part of rider information, because it enables us hopefully to remove ourselves from one of those 45 or one of the 60 people that are below the line. So another reason that we went around looking at having a program such as MotoCAP is PPE is very effective, but Liz DeRome, one of my colleagues that works with me at Deakin University, did a study in Canberra where she was looking at motorcyclists that had presented at emergency, but also she picked up the ones that didn't go to emergency, but took their motorcycle to a motorcycle repair shop. Now, the beautiful part is Canberra is very remote. So if you crash your motorcycle in the Canberra region, then you're most likely going to end up with your motorcycle being repaired in Canberra, or you're going to end up at a Canberra hospital. And what we found was that, or what she found was, approximately 30% of the gear that people were wearing actually failed during a crash. Now the question is, are these damage levels reasonable under the crash conditions? So another thing that we looked at was the low usage rates in hot conditions. So riders are 3 times less likely to ride protected in hot conditions due to heat discomfort. And so it enabled us to say, well, not only is protective gear got to be protective, but it's also got to be suitable for the riding environment. So whether you're riding in Seattle or you're riding in Tucson, Arizona, you've got to have the gear that's appropriate for what you're doing. So this all helped us to understand with MotoCAP. Now, this graph here I actually put together a few nights ago. My wife cursed and swore at me when I come to bed because I'd been up quite late, but I got into doing it for this particular presentation and it really engrossed me. Now, this shows all of the gear that we've tested so far with MotoCAP and where it falls with regards to its star value for protection. Now, for us, you can see 2, 3, 4, 5-star gear is starting to get quite good. The worrying part that we have with MotoCAP is this level of gear that is down in this 0.5-star to 1-star region, mostly in a cluster in the textile pants, in the protective denim pants, and in the textile jacket area. If you look, all of the other gear pretty much has 2, 3, 4, and even some 5-star gear out there. But these protective pants, for instance, are much lower. And if we look at protective pants, the reason that we're getting so much gear that is 0.5-star and 1-star is protective pants is far less likely to have armor in the hip, and quite often they won't even have armor in the knee. And when we do a rating with MotoCAP, we're really, really critical about making sure there's armor provided in the knees and the hips of garments. And the reason that we do this is we'd rather it be the option of the motorcyclist to take it out than the option for the motorcyclist having to go and buy it as an extra item. Because we all know when we go in and buy gear, we buy the gear, we're not going to look at getting additional armor and paying extra money to do that. So the whole aim that we're trying with MotoCAP is to convince the companies to supply the armor as part of the product. But even if you consider removable armor being absent in pants, that doesn't equate for the textile jackets that are also clustered down in that lower area, especially when you look at textile jackets being pretty much predominantly sold with elbow and shoulder armor now. And this is because of some of the materials that they're made out of. So the reasons we've done MotoCAP, the main reason is to allow us, the rider, to make an informed decision on their clothes. But we've done it with a number of indirect consequences. One of the main indirect consequences is to encourage manufacturers to increase the protection and comfort of their clothing. If we look at it, when Europe started the Euro NCAP for star rating of motor vehicles, there were almost no motor vehicles that were getting 5 stars. But now if you go to Europe, it's almost impossible to buy a motor vehicle that's not 5 stars. And so the idea of having a rating system like MotoCAP means that over time, manufacturers will compete with each other and slowly raise their gear. Now, it's important with MotoCAP that we have both a protection and a comfort. Otherwise, what you'll end up with is suits of armor that no one wants to wear. So we're looking at both protection and comfort. So over time, we hope that MotoCAP will slowly raise the bar. One of the things we were also doing with MotoCAP is trying to drive the manufacturers to implement a quality control system. When we purchase clothing for MotoCAP, no one knows where we're going to purchase it. It's randomly purchased from stores in Australia and New Zealand. So we have a secret buyer that turns up at a store and they're buying clothing like they would buy if they were a normal motorcyclist going in to buy clothing. So they'll only ever buy a pair of denim pants and a leather jacket and maybe a textile jacket and a pair of gloves. So they're not going to show up as being someone that's purchasing for MotoCAP. We don't walk in and buy 10 leather pants and 10 leather jackets and so forth. So no one knows what we're going to buy or where we're going to buy it. And hopefully this will result in manufacturers actually doing quality control testing on their product. Quite a large number of the garments that hang in stores anywhere in the world have not been through quality control testing for their protection levels when they leave the factory. They may have been certified at some stage by the company, but generally it's rare for them to have further quality control testing. Another reason, an indirect consequence of MotoCAP, is that it enables manufacturers to easily compare their products with their composition. Quite often, a lot of these companies don't do testing and they never ever know how their product stands versus another product. So with MotoCAP, we provide a full report on each product so they can go in and look at how their leather jacket compares with another company's leather jacket. And very quickly they can understand, oh, gee, we need to improve our quality, or gee, we're one of the better ones. Maybe this is something we need to use as a marketing claim. And the last one is it makes it harder for false protection claims. We all know of a product that says, oh, gee, I get 11 seconds of abrasion time. We know with MotoCAP that what we see when we test it is not always the claims that the company has. And so this means that the rider actually can see what the performance was on the garment. So MotoCAP is an Australian and New Zealand government funded program. So we're independent of manufacturers. As I said before, no one knows what we're going to buy or when we're going to buy it. So what we have is a random generator. We have a big, large list of products. We will say, okay, this time we need to buy 10 textile pants. We'll press a button and it will randomly give us the manufacturers and the products that we're going to purchase. We then go into the stores, we purchase those garments, we bring them back, we get a second one online. And the reason we get one in store and one online is to try and enable us to get two different manufacturing lots, or at least to get some variation from one garment to another. If we get the two in the one store, then they're likely to be the same. And the reason we buy one in a retail store is if it's hanging in a retail store, it's generally one of the biggest sellers. Many companies will have, say, 50 textile jackets, but only 20 of those are widely sold. The other 30 are only sold in small volumes. And we're aiming to get the one that most people are riding in. And back, we get a second one online. We then do ergonomics testing. We then do all of our abrasion and protection and thermal comfort testing. And then the results are provided to the MotoCAP website and they go up free online for anyone in the world to look at. So when you go in, there's a couple of different ways that you can engage with MotoCAP. The simplest way of all is to look at the protection and the comfort stars. Now, this is a comparison of, or this is what you would go if you clicked on that jacket button and went into jackets, although this is a little bit different now. And it shows us three products, three leather jackets. One's a English-made jacket, one's an Australian brand, one is an Italian, well-known Italian brand. You can see there's quite a price range there. We've got our 5-star product is $400, and our lower 4-star product is $900. So what we've found with all of our testing is price has no relevance to the level of protection you're going to get. And this is a really good way of showing it. Now, this is the simplest way to look at MotoCAP. You get a protection, you get a thermal comfort, how comfortable it'll be to wear on a hot day. If you want more information, then you click on one of these garments and you drill down using this little button here. Now, I'm showing you this, but in the very near future, there's going to be quite a significant change to MotoCAP. They're going through at the moment to make the website more user-friendly to use. And one of the things I forgot to mention a few slides ago, they're also including the crash testing of helmets. So in the very near future, not only will we have jackets, pants, and gloves, but you'll also have a link to helmet results as well. So if you want to get more information, you can come down into here. Now you can see that the protection rating for this pair of Revit pants is broken down into 2 stars for safety, 3 out of 10 for abrasion, 1 out of 10 for impact, and 10 out of 10 for burst. Now this is a really good example of why you might want to drill down into this. 3 out of 10 for abrasion is starting to get reasonable. 1 out of 10 for impact's no good. Now, I know, and if I was to drag up the information on this particular product, the further information, I know that when we tested this garment, it did not have hip armor. Now, if it had have had hip armor, it would not have been a 2-star garment. It's likely that this would have been a 3-star garment and possibly even a 4-star garment. So by putting armor into this garment, you would significantly raise its protection levels. And which is good because now Revit quite commonly supply most of their gear with their very thin armor. So it's quite an interesting one. What we'll also see here is the thermal comfort on this product is 4 stars or 8 out of 10. That's quite good. If we consider when we test an ordinary pair of denim jeans using the same method that we would get 4 stars, it's almost like not wearing a pair of protective motorcycle pants to wear this particular product. So it helps us if we're riding in Arizona, this is probably the product we're going to want to wear rather than a pair of leather pants. If we want more, if you want to know every single thing on the product, then you can come in. Every product that we test has a 5-page test report, and it shows every abrasion rating, every impact hit that we do on the armor, every burst test we do on the seams. It shows you what the thermal comfort tests were, and it gives you, you can see our little pictures that we have of our men just here. And you can quickly at a glance see how well something's going to perform. In that case there, it's a lady's leggings. So the tests, what do? When we developed MotoCAP, we did not reinvent the wheel. What we used was the European standard test methods that everyone knows of CE EN 13595, which is a traditional motorcycle clothing test method, level 1 and level 2 that a lot of people know. We used the abrasion test, the seam strength test, and the armor impact test. Well, the armor impact 1621, but similar sort of thing. We use these established tests because they're already well developed, people already know them, and there's been quite a large amount of work, especially with this abrasion test that I'm about to show you in a second. There's been a lot of work between the test results and actual rider injury studies, and this is quite important to us. So this is our abrasion test. You can see we've got a test head here that drops down onto a moving belt, and we're measuring the period of time it takes to form a hole. And if you look very carefully, you might just see this fine wire that is going up here. This is in underneath the test sample, and when the wire breaks, it will stop the test. Now, hopefully this video will run. And this shows Gayatri in our laboratory, and she is setting up the abrasion tester. So you can see her putting the wire in. She will drop the test sample around so that it can drop its 50 millimeters or 2 inches down onto the belt. The belt is running at 8 meters a second or 28 kilometers per hour. We wear through the sample until it forms a hole, and then it will lift up. And you can see the amount of debris that's being created as we go through that test method. So what we're looking for is the period of time it takes to form that hole, and that enables us to compare one garment against another. Now, we use that same test method for every single thing that we test in MotoCAP, whether it's gloves, whether it's jackets, whether it's pants. So you're able to compare the abrasion time of every single product against each other so that they're all the same. Now, burst testing, what we're looking at with burst testing is how strong the seams of a garment will be. I keep going to use my hands, which is really funny. Anyone who's seen me present know that I walk around and use my hands a lot, so this is killing me. But what we're doing is we're looking at the strength of this seam, but also looking at the strength of the fabric to understand how well it's going to hold together when we first hit the ground. When we crash, we actually grip up with the road surface, and this puts really, really large strains onto the materials that we're wearing. And this is when bursting is likely to occur. And so what we use is a hydraulic burst tester. Now, Armstrong is showing us how this operates. What we do is we clamp our seam in between two grips, an upper and a lower, and then we inflate a hydraulic diaphragm with high pressure liquid until we get to a point where we cause failure to occur. Now, this will apply pressure up to 2000 kPa of pressure, which is quite significantly high. And this enables us to see how well those seams are going to hold together and how well the fabric's going to hold together for that initial contact with the road. The other test that we use for protection is how good the armor is. Now, when we measure armor, we're looking at how much energy is absorbed by the armor and not transmitted through to our body. So if you look, the upper device that you can see here is our faller mechanism, and it weighs 5 kilograms, which is roughly about 11 or 12 pounds. And it drops down onto our sample, and below it, you can see just see the shiny part of the impactor below the armor. This has a load cell underneath it that measures the amount of force that is transmitted through. We also have an accelerometer which is attached to the faller, and we're looking to see that the results from both of these measurement methods are the same, so that we know that we're getting an accurate result. Now, this is taken in someone else's laboratory. This is not in my laboratory. We've got a new impact protector, the impact tester, which was installed just before COVID, and I haven't been able to capture the video with that. But you'll see what happens is the faller comes down with quite some force, and it slams into the sample. And if you're quite quick at looking at it, you'll see that there's actually marks on that armor. If I go backwards a little bit, if I bring it back to here, you can see there's marks on the armor where the strike has occurred. So with anything, armor is very similar to helmets. So once you have an impact on your armor, if you crash your bike in your armor, you should take the armor out, throw it away, and put some new stuff in, because the crush damage that you get from that impact causes it structural failure, and then that armor will not do its job the next time that you're wearing it. Also with armor, if you think about it, it is like a helmet. Every time we put our armor on, in our elbow region here, we're moving our arms like this, it's compressing against our elbow. So over time, armor, like a helmet, will lose its effectiveness as well. So if we have that favorite jacket that we've had for 10 years, it probably needs new armor in it. The last one I want to show you is our thermal comfort test. And what we have, you can see this image here, we have a panel out of the front and side of a leather jacket. We put a large panel of the garment, either from the seat of the pants or from the front and side of a jacket, into our tester. And this is the same sort of test method that's used for sports clothing, such as Adidas or Nike or someone like that would use to measure the effectiveness for sweat and heat to dissipate through sportswear clothing. So we use this test to measure how comfortable it will be to wear this clothing on a hot day. Now, this short video again shows the test method. So it has both a dry mode and a wet mode. In the wet mode, what we have is a whole series of pores underneath a membrane. You can see Guthrie putting the membrane on, that allows sweat to come through, or water simulating sweat to come through the skin of the machine, through the clothing. And because on a hot day, most of our heat leaves our body as sweat, if we're sweating and the sweat is getting out of our clothing, we will lose heat. So with the tester, we've got to keep putting heat into the hot plate to keep it warm. if the sweat can't get out of our clothing and gets trapped, that heat can't get out of our body. So with a test machine, we don't have to put in as much heat. And so we know that the garment is not as effective on a hot day as what it could be. The next image I'm going to show you is some of the work we've done in the science to understand how all this works. Now, this is some work that we did with the University of New South Wales and Neura, and what we're looking at was people that had presented an emergency from a motorcycle crash and what their probability of injury was. Now, if they had an injury, they're up the top here. If they didn't have an injury, they're down the bottom here. And what we did is we collected their clothing, we did abrasion testing on it, and we did a comparison between the abrasion times that the clothing got and then the probability of having soft tissue injury. Now, this graph's not perfect, and the reason it's not perfect is we only collected the people that turned up in emergency, so we didn't get the people that crashed their bike, got up and hopped back on and continued riding, which would increase the number of points along the bottom. And we also haven't considered that if we're naked and we're riding a motorcycle, so we have an abrasion time of 0, then the likelihood of us being injured by soft tissue injury when we crash is going to be 100% or 1. So really this graph should come up at the end. But what it did show us was that there was a really good relationship between the probability of injury, of soft tissue injury, and the abrasion time of our clothing. Now, this is the abrasion time on that test method that I showed you before. Another piece of work that we've done is to understand what happens when we first hit the road. So if we look, pardon my crude drawing skills here, but you can see the arm inside the blue layer of clothing. When we hit the ground, the red arrow shows the compression between the road surface or the ground and our body pushing the clothing into that ground. And what will happen is we will grip that clothing up by the ground, but at the same time, our arm will also pull on the clothing, stretching it. And so what happens is we get this large force that occurs just here in the fabric or in the materials, whether it's leather or textile. Now, if the fabric is weak, it will break in this area, generally where we're pushing it into the ground, because the road, the act of pushing it into the ground sometimes will give minute damage to the fabric that gives you a weak point where it can fail. Now, we know this happens. This is our leather hitting the impact tester in the laboratory. You can see it's got almost a perfect spherical shape on either end. We go a little bit into the abrasion. You can see there's a little bit of deformation at the leading end of the abrasion, the trailing end of the abrasion tester. Our leading end is still spherical, and you can see the belt just starting to bunch up a little bit because of the grip between the clothing and the belt. And this is at the 5 millisecond mark. We get to the 25 millisecond mark, and you can see we're back to having spherical at both ends. This leather has withstood that grip and is now transitioned from our grip stage to our slip stage or our abrasion stage. So it's starting, you can just see some fine debris around the base there. Now, if we take a fleecy fabric, now this is a fleecy garment made to simulate a protective hoodie or something similar, you'll see we've still got our spherical start at our first impact. After the 7 millisecond mark, you can see the level of distortion that's occurred in this garment as it's hit the ground. You can see the front end here is quite heavily pulled, and the back end here has quite heavy distortion marks. At this point, at the 7 millisecond mark, this fabric has already failed. There's already a hole in here large enough for me to put 4 of my fingers through the fabric. At the 27 millisecond mark, you can see that there's significant abrasion debris at the back here, and you can see the ragged edge on the front of the sample where it's failed and has broken open. And this shows the difference between an abrasion test sample of the leather and a burst test sample on this left-hand side here of that textile. So you can see this massively burst edge here, where it's jagged, where it's torn off. And then if we go to the back of the sample, you'll see that there's a flap of textiles where it's peeled open, exposing that aramid fabric underneath to increased abrasion. Now, because this thing burst open, this aramid fabric underneath fails far earlier because it's subjected to impact forces and abrasion forces it's probably not designed to have. Now, mindful of the time, I probably should move on a little bit. Another piece of scientific work that we've done to make sure that MotoCAP is aimed at the right level is this work that we've done here with our on-road abrasion tester. So what we've done is we've fitted an abrasion tester to the back of a car, and as we drive down the road, we're able to drop the sample onto the road. Now, this is a typical asphalt surface. This is a car park that we're testing in Auckland, in New Zealand, and you can see the surface. Now, in Australia and New Zealand, we have quite a large amount of this chip seal. Talking to Brittany the other day, she said that you guys have a lot more of the asphalt surface like what we have here. And this chip seal type surface is really limited to more back roads and things like that, rather than motorways and highways and so forth like we have here. So this is our abrasion tester, and this is a typical polyester fabric that you would find in a textile jacket in the front or the back. Now you can see on asphalt we're getting about 1.84 seconds to hole, traveling at 28 kilometers an hour. Now if we go into the wet, you'll see that significant increases in the abrasion time occur. So if you're going to crash in the rain, because you get both a lubricating and a cooling effect. If we go out onto chip seal, which is the majority of our riding roads that we have in Australia and New Zealand, we're getting about half a second of abrasion time. So if we look at it, that equates to about 4 yards before we've worn a hole in our sample. So I have a heavier nylon fabric, and I also have a lighter nylon fabric that I'd normally show at this time, but due to the time limits, I won't. They perform very similar to what that 600 denier polyester did. The 500 denier nylon's almost identical to the 600 denier polyester, and the 1600 denier nylon lasts about twice the amount of time. But people say to me, what about protective denim? This is a middle of the range protective denim on asphalt. You can see it lasts for quite some significant period of time. Now, this is not the best protective denim you can get, and it's definitely not the worst protective denim you can get. I haven't measured any of that on road surfaces yet, but you can see that it's quite up there. So 26.6 seconds before we form a hole in that. And the car park we were working in, we almost ran out of distance. We go out to chip seal, it's not as good, but it's still getting 4 seconds. So that would equate to about 34, 36 yards of distance before we wore a hole in that sample. Now, people say to me, what's the best? We all know what the best is. Everyone tells us if you're going to go and you're going to crash in leather. This is leather, and you'll see the leather on the asphalt surface behaves almost exactly the same. Well, it's a bit better than what the denim was that I showed you a minute ago. So leather is still the premium product to be wearing when we're riding on a motorcycle. And when I ride, I normally will have a leather jacket on, but quite often, most of the time, I will wear protective denim pants. It's only when it's wet and raining that I'll go down the path of a textile pants. So once again, 28 seconds, we go out to the chip seal. And we're getting about 5 seconds, which is roughly 40, 42 yards before we wear a hole through that sample. So the reason we did this was to compare what we got on our laboratory machine, which is circled by this red here, and what we got out on the actual road surface. Now, in Australia, and New Zealand, the majority of the roads are like this. So we could see that our times on our abrasion tester were almost identical to the road times that we were getting on chip seal. If anything, the times on chip seal were slightly longer than what we got on the abrasion tester. When we went to asphalt, which is what we find in our cities and on our major motorways, we got significantly higher abrasion times. But where the abrasion time of the product was not brilliant on our test machine, the increases were not as much. So if we look at denim and our leather, we were seeing 4 to 5 times increases. When we went to our textiles, we're only seeing maybe a doubling of the protection levels when we were on asphalt. So the takeaway message in my work is, if you're riding on asphalt roads, which the predominant have a low abrasion resistance, then you can get away with a lower abrasion resistant fabric. And so what we say as a rule of thumb, if you're riding on asphalt surfaces, then 2 stars is more than enough. If you're going out into the countryside where you're getting into higher riding speeds and you're going to a place where chip seal is more predominant, then you want to be 3 stars or higher. Protective textiles, in all of our testing, we tend to find protective textile is not as good as what we would like it to be. But remember that if you're riding in protective textile and you have your armor in there, then you're going to be far more protected wearing that garment with armor in its elbow and shoulder, which is where you're predominantly going to slide, in your hip and knees, than what you would be without. So if you're wearing textile and you wear textile on a major basis, make sure you've got good armor in it. And of course, the last one is, next time you go to buy clothes, use the MotoCAP system to help to advise you on what to buy. Now, that's all I've got for you today. I'll finish with my last image, which is me and one of my motorcycles. I counted it up yesterday. I've got 6 motorcycles out in my workshop. 3 that are registered and the rest that are in various states of repair. This is 1953 BSA Bantam D3, and my wife affectionately calls it the exercise bike because apparently I spend more time pushing it than I do riding it. So I'll finish on that note, and thank you to everyone.
Chris, thank you so much for your expertise and your knowledge. We have a ton of questions from the audience, so if you'll unshare your screen so they can see your lovely face. I'm going to start with a question that I know you have covered in the past in your presentations, and I know is on everyone's mind. Can you tell us why it does not matter the speed at which you are testing the materials? You don't need to raise the speed in order to see if the material lasts better at high speed or low speed.
Now I'm cursing and kicking myself at this point because I actually have a graph that shows this and I forgot to show it in my presentation. What we've done with that on-road abrasion tester is we have tested at 5 kilometers an hour up to 50 kilometers an hour. And we've tested about 40 test samples over those test speeds. So literally 1 to 2 kilometer an hour increments with the same material types, time after time after time. What we see is as we increase the speed, like you'd expect, we decrease the time it takes to form a hole. So if you're doing 20 kilometers an hour and it gets 2 seconds abrasion time, if you're doing 40 kilometers an hour, you'd expect it to get 1 second abrasion time. We don't quite see the relationship like that. We see it even better than that because the faster we go, the more we bounce. So if you imagine it, if I toss you over and you sit on your bottom and I grab hold of your feet and I drag you along by your feet, you're going to interact with every bit of road surface between where I start dragging you and when I finish dragging you. So that your whole weight of your body is on your bottom, and so you're going to interact with every one of those road surfaces. If I grab you by the feet and I drag you at 4 times the speed, then every bump you hit, you're going to bounce in the air. Now, if you're doing 100 kilometers an hour or 60 miles an hour, you're going to bounce and you're going to be in the air for significant periods of time, or you're going to have less pressure on your clothing for significant periods of time. So you don't interact with as much surface, and the result is you will go further with less abrasion. Now, of course, if you're doing 60 mile an hour, sooner or later, you're going to get down to 5 mile an hour and you're going to have done a lot of abrasion damage. So don't think, oh, Chris said go quicker because you're going to do less damage. But we know that if we quote times on our abrasion tester, if we say it's going to take 4 seconds, we know that's going to be roughly 32 yards that you're going to slide before you get a hole in it. If we quote 8 seconds, we know that that's going to be, 1 second, we know that's roughly going to be 8 yards before you've got a hole in your product, regardless of the speed you crash at and regardless of the test speed we test at.
Thank you for that, Chris. That's a perfect explanation, because, you know, sometimes these tests are inherent and sometimes they're not. So this is why we have a doctor doing it.
And I'm going to say one other thing. We show the worst case scenario. You come down, you low side, your leg's stuck underneath the motorcycle, you can't get it out, you slide all the direction in the one spot. If we watch crash videos, realistically, we don't slide in the one spot for the entirety of our slide. We tend to roll around and move around. So if you look at it, if it's an 8-second product, you're not going to use all 8 seconds of that because you're going to move around. So people come to me and say, oh, you've given this a half a star, yet I crashed in it and it wasn't a problem. That's because they crashed in the rain. They were doing 30 mile an hour. They tumbled during the whole time of their crash, so they didn't wear in the one spot. So when we look at MotoCAP, we're looking at a worst case scenario.
Perfect. Okay, so questions from the audience. I have one from Dan Pedersen, who runs a program here in the United States called Smarter. He wants to know, will you define protective denim for us? Please describe what that means.
So I'm wearing a pair of Levi jeans at the moment, not pushing brands or anything like that, but everyone knows what Levi is. They're an ordinary pair of denim jeans. They're not protective denim. So protective denim is where it's marketed by a motorcycle company as being a protective motorcycle pant. And for me, based on the statistics from MotoCAP, that needs to be a 2-layer product. I hold my fingers up to show the V, the 2. It needs to be a 2-layer product where you have an outer layer of denim and an inner layer of a protective material. Now that protective material can be, using trade names here, it can be Kevlar, it can be Vectran, it can be Armalith. Yeah, Armalith, it can be polyester. As long as there is an inner layer that is a protective layer, we find that 2-layer products perform reasonably well. Now, there are some horrible 2-layer products and there's some really, really good 2-layer products. But when we've done a quick comparison of the statistics, if it's 2 layers, it's going to be protective. If it's 1 layer, it's generally not going to be that protective. And an example in the graph that I was showing at the start, one of the lower performing products is a 1-layer product, which is a $550 pair of denim jeans. It's 1-layer and it lasts about half a second on our abrasion tester, which is about 4 yards before you've got a hole in it. When you go to a 2-layer product, the worst 2-layer products we get generally are 1.5 seconds. So on asphalt, that's going to be maybe 3 or 4 seconds of abrasion time. So as compared to that half a second product, which is maybe going to be 1 second on asphalt. So 2 layers, you're definitely going to have some level of protection.
Great, thanks for explaining that a little bit more. And I think you answered Joanne's question as well. She wanted to know what kind of denim was being tested, and I think that's the same idea of the question that Dan had. We have a question from Blair, who is in New Zealand. He says, it's more of a comment, but if you can kind of speak to this. Blair says that for him, the leather gear tends to fit closer and therefore keeps his armor in the right place.
Yes.
So he wears it for that aspect and not just for abrasion. So with that said, sorry, go ahead.
So if you look at it, denim pants aren't perfect. So most likely they're not going to have a tight fit around the ankle. And they're not going to be that tight around the knees. So when you crash, when you first hit, your armor hopefully is going to be pretty much in the right spot. But then what will tend to happen is the clothing will roll around on your body. So if you have a subsequent impact, there's a high likelihood that your armor won't be in the right place. So denim pants are not perfect. It's like anything. We're taking a risk when we ride a motorcycle, and we're using something like MotoCAP to help us to understand what level of risk we're willing to take. So leather pants, as Blair was saying, is really, really important because they're designed not to slip up your leg in a crash. They're not going to rotate around your leg in a crash. generally, if they're reasonably tight fitting. So the result is that your armor is going to sit where it's meant to be, and not move, so that if you have some subsequent impacts on your knee or on your hip or on your elbow or your shoulder, you're going to continue to have that protection in place.
Okay. And Joanne wants to know, and I think this has kind of already been answered, but just to reassure, does incorrect fitment affect failure rates, if you have any data on that?
We haven't got any data on that at all. So one of the things we do want to do at some stage in our research is to look at fitment of clothing. We do know that if you don't have the armor positioned in the right spot, then that's going to be a problem. Most riders say to me, oh, I bought a jacket and the armor doesn't fit in the right spot, so I don't have the armor there. Everyone is able to use a sewing thread, or they can go and find someone that can use a sewing thread. Move the pocket, put the armor in the right spot. It's really, really simple. All of my denim jeans all have aftermarket armor in them, and I'm the one that sewed that in place. And if I can sew it in place, anyone can sew it in place. And so move your armor, put it in the right spot so it's in the right spot to start off with. And don't rely on the armor that come with the garment if you don't think it's any good. Get new armor if you feel like it. And armor's been tested for a number of years. There's level 1 and there's level 2. Everyone knows level 2 is better. So if you've got a garment that's got level 1 armor in it, going and buying aftermarket level 2 armor is going to give you more protection.
Okay, great. Pat and Sylvia want to know, are you testing a variety of gear, both designs and sizes, to allow for different sizes of humans, and how those designs might change for, say, a thinner person or a full-figured man or woman?
So our ergonomics testing is done on 2 riders, 1 male rider, 1 female rider, just because we don't change that around. But our testing is done on a range of different garments. We test anything from a small to an extra large. It depends on what's hanging in the store on the day to what we pick up. One of those garments that we pick up will be the size of our rider that's doing the ergonomics testing. So we will always end up with 1 garment that's in that size class, but that tends to be the predominant size class of what's out there in the market being purchased. We cannot get it perfect for everyone. So what we do is we test protection and we test thermal comfort. We cannot test ergonomics for every person. We cannot do thermal comfort for comfort of the gear for everyone, because everyone will feel different. Some people will say, oh, look, I don't like it when it's scratchy around my wrists, or I don't like it when it's loose around my wrists. I want it to be tight, and I don't want it tight, I want it loose. And so we can only do the things that we can put a quantitative measure on. So abrasion, how much energy the armor will absorb, how good the seams are things we can quantitate. How well the armor sits in the right position for a tall, thin person versus a short, dumpy person, can't say.
Okay. And just so you guys know, dumpy is not a bad word. It's an Australian slang. No, it's okay. It's just,
I think it's English, that one.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you for that answer, Chris. I think it's definitely smart for us to remember as riders that when it comes to the scientific method, there's only so much that you can do to, equate for the differences in human body shapes as well. So we still have to be, subjective and objective when we can be. A question from Ellen, who is a safety instructor here in the United States. She wants to know how the helmet testing protocol is going to go.
So the helmet protocol is already set up. There is already a program called Crash, crash.com.au, I think. It's an Australian-based system. So there's 2 helmet systems, Crash and Sharp. Sharp is the UK-based one and has been going for many, many years. Crash, I think, has been going for about 6 or 7 years and has about 7,000 people looking at the website on an annual basis, or 7,000 people looking at the website on a monthly basis, I think. So both are established systems. The group that pays for MotoCAP, or the majority of the group that pays for MotoCAP also pays for Crash. So it just was a no-brainer. Why isn't all the info in the one spot? And so we're about to get all the information in the one spot, which for me is brilliant. And I was at the Shiny Side Up program in New Zealand in February, and the question I got asked the most is, why don't you do helmets? So to come back and to discover that they're going to have the helmets on the same website it's just going to be brilliant, because it's just a one-stop shop for the rider when they're looking at gear.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you. We have 8 open questions and we have run out of time, but for everyone who had a question that didn't get answered, Chris is going to be able to follow up with you via email afterwards. So please rest assured that you will have your questions answered. There are so many important questions in here, and I just knew this was going to happen because everyone's just like me. I'm like, oh, please tell me more. I want to know more. The one thing I do want to ask, the last question, Chris, is
yes.
The changes that you mentioned to me on what is happening on the manufacturer level because of what you are doing at MotoCAP. You mentioned things staying out on the shelves longer. They were going to, discontinue a garment, but it got 5 stars and everyone wants it, so they continued to make it. Can you kind of tell us how that end goal is working and what you're hoping that it does for manufacturers in the future?
So I give an example. There is one product that performed very, very well quite early on in MotoCAP, and that product, I still see, it's been 3 years since we rated that product, or almost 3 years since we rated that product. It was almost at its end of cycle when we rated it. That manufacturer continues to have requests for that product, and it continues to hang in store. It blows me away. They've actually gone and got extra versions of that remanufactured so that they could manage the requirements for that particular product. What we need with MotoCAP is someone to give a high performing product in each of the classes. Once we get that, then it will drag all the other manufacturers along with them. And the result is the winners out of all this are us, the riders. If we can get nice, comfortable to wear 4- and 5-star garments, then we're going to be more protected. Now, the last thing I want to finish with is, don't think you have to wear 5-star. I don't. My leather jacket is 3 stars. My denim pants are 4 stars that I wear. The whole idea of it is to get the level of risk that you're acceptable to wear when you go riding. And we're saying in the right conditions, 2 stars is enough. And if you're going higher speeds and more aggressive roads, then you want to be 3 stars or higher. There's not a lot of gear out there that's 5 stars. I think we've got one jacket that's 5 stars and a couple of pairs of gloves at the moment. So make sure that you're getting good gear that fits you well, that you're going to wear every time, that has the higher protection that you're comfortable with. Don't think that you have to find 5 stars for everything.
Words of wisdom. Thank you so much, Dr. Huron, for everything that you've shared with us today, for all of the work that you have done and are continuing to do, changing things on an amazing level for motorcyclists. We are hoping here in the United States that we will see manufacturers starting to get their gear tested with this same program, so that we can benefit just as much as everyone in New Zealand and Australia has already benefited. Thank you so much for your knowledge and for taking the time out on a Sunday morning to be with us here at Rev Talks. You are an official Rev Pro, and we are forever in your debt for sharing your experience and expertise.
More than happy to, Brittany, and great for you and Alicia to have me. And if you ever want me to have another talk to answer a few more questions, I'm more than happy to do that as well. So.
Sounds great. Thank you, Chris. For everyone in the audience, thank you so much for spending your Saturday afternoon/evening with us. We have one more presentation to go, and it's not even a presentation, it is happy hour. So you have 7 minutes from right now to go grab yourself a cold beverage. Does not have to be any specific type. And we are going to have our professional comedian BT hosting for the next hour for us to all have a great time and have a last great session. So we'll see you all in 6 minutes. Have a great rest of your weekend, and thank you so much for joining us.